Welcome back to Fire 2020 and thanks for bearing with us. Obviously, a lot of news happening today. Coronavirus, obviously still very much in the news. And when we do involve government ministers, sometimes they do need to go into meetings about coronavirus, which I believe is what may have happened with Lord Stephen Greenhalgh. But I can tell you now that we can speak to him. Before we join him, let me just tell you a little bit more about Lord Greenhalgh. He was appointed an unpaid Minister of State jointly at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government and the Home Office in March of this year. He served as Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime in London, as you'll know, from 2012 until 2016, and Hammersmith and Fulham Council Leader from 2006 until 2012. And he became Lord Greenhalgh on the 16th of April 2020. And I'm delighted to say that we are now joined by Lord Stephen Greenhalgh, who's going to speak to us a little bit about the Fire Safety Bill. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much indeed for that introduction, and apologies again for being a little late. As you know, we're right on the just a few hours away, less than 24 hours away to the second lockdown, you know, it's a difficult time for everybody in government and for our whole population. We're having to learn to live with this wretched virus. So I'd like to start by thanking the Fire Protection Association, Institution of Fire Engineers and the National Fire Chiefs Council for hosting this important event and inviting me to speak. It's a real pleasure to be able to address you. Before I go further, I do want to take the opportunity to thank our fire and rescue services for their incredible response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Across the nation, thousands of firefighters and staff have worked to support wider COVID-19 efforts. The National Fire Chiefs Council very quickly agreed a framework with unions and employers for firefighters to support the vulnerable and their emergency service partners. This has enabled firefighters to provide support to the NHS and ambulance trusts, provide support for the most vulnerable people, and support coroners. At one stage, 300 firefighters were helping ambulance services in London alone. As Minister with responsibility for fire, I'm incredibly proud of the way all our firefighters and everyone in fire and rescue services have responded to this crisis. This is going to be a difficult winter, and I'm grateful for your resilience and continued efforts as we all battle our way through this together. Turning to the Grenfell fire and the case for change in fire and rescue services. It's been more than 3 years since the Grenfell fire tragedy, the largest residential fire since the Second World War, and none of us can forget the terrible events at Grenfell Tower in the early morning of the 14th of June, nor the 72 people who lost their lives as a result. Our thoughts today are very much with the victims' families, survivors and fellow residents who had to rebuild their lives over the past 3.5 years. We are resolute in our commitment to delivering change. Significant steps have already been taken to address building and fire safety risks to ensure that such a tragedy can never happen again. So that's the background for the need for fire safety reform, or what people in the services, in our fire and rescue services, would call transformational change. A full independent inquiry was established in the aftermath of the fire, which is being led by Sir Martin Moore-Bick, to understand what happened that night, to make recommendations to ensure it can never happen again. The government also commissioned an independent review of building regulations and safety, led by Dame Judith Hackett. Her findings have underpinned our unprecedented programme of building and fire safety reform. As soon as possible after the Grenfell Tower tragedy, the government started working with relevant authorities and building owners to identify the risk and prevalence of buildings with unsafe aluminium composite material, ACM cladding, and set up a comprehensive programme to remediate buildings 6 stories and above, or 18 metres, because some, like the Cube, were just under 18 metres. So we talk about 6 stories and above with unsafe ACM. We are committed to developing fundamental reform of building and fire safety, and we are confident our reforms will introduce a new era of assurance and accountability to residents on their safety. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for reform, and we must work together to ensure we get this right. There is much to be done. We've just closed the fire safety consultation, which was launched in July this year. The consultation built upon the call for evidence on the fire safety order held in 2019 and was a vital next step in the process to ensure that the fire safety order continues to be fit for purpose, particularly as we consider the reform of the wider building safety landscape. Most residents agreed that the fire safety order should continue to provide, most respondents, agreed that the fire safety order should continue to provide a framework for a risk-based and proportionate approach to the regulation of fire safety. However, a number of areas were also highlighted for further consideration. Our proposals to the fire safety consultation seek to address these. For example, we're proposing to place new requirements on all responsible persons to record their completed assessments and engage only with competent persons when completing such an assessment. Place a legal requirement on all responsible persons to record who they are, the extent of their responsibility for the building under the FSO, their contact information as part of the fire risk assessment. We're also consulting on whether responsible persons should be required to provide a contact address in the United Kingdom. These measures should also support greater cooperation and coordination between multiple responsible persons within a single premise and sit alongside a further proposal to require all responsible persons to identify themselves to each other within the same premises. These proposals focus on providing residents in regulated premises with greater assurance from fire safety improvements in their buildings, driving effective and sustainable operational outcomes for firefighters, and in holding those responsible for breaches of the fire safety order to account. We have also committed to an overhaul of guidance provided under the order to better understand compliance and self-regulation in the sector. We have received over 200 responses to the consultation, and I would like to thank everyone who took the time to engage with the process and shared their thoughts and expertise. It is a fundamental right that all people in regulated premises feel safe and are safe from fire regardless of where they live, stay or work. I'm committed to ensuring that our reforms are driven by effectiveness and deliver on the concerns and needs of those involved in and affected by the fire safety order. Turning to the fire safety bill and building safety bill. Our reforms go wider with this primary legislation, these two pieces of primary legislation. One which is a 3-clause bill, the fire safety bill, and the other one which is going to be well over 120 clauses, the building safety bill. As a first step in the process of legislative reform, we brought forward the fire safety bill. I'm pleased to say that the bill is at an advanced stage, having passed through the Commons, and most recently the Lords Committee stage of the bill took place on the 29th of October. The fire safety bill clarifies under the fire safety order responsible persons for multi-occupied residential buildings must assess the fire safety risks for the structure, external walls and flat entrance doors as part of the fire risk assessment process. We have engaged closely with the fire sector to help inform this bill. A key component of this was our commissioning a group of industry representatives through a task and finish group chaired jointly by the NFCC, and I'd like to thank Roy and his team for that, as well as the leadership of the Fire Sector Federation. So thank you all for your help with that. The group provided advice on a proportionate and pragmatic way of commencing the bill, which takes account of the challenges around capacity amongst fire risk professionals. When it is commenced, this bill will provide a firm foundation from which to deliver the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 1 report recommendations that require a change in law. The Fire Safety Bill and consultation are important steps in a major programme to reform building and fire safety, and will give effect to our manifesto commitment to implement the recommendations of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 1 report. Alongside this, the publication of the draft Building Safety Bill represents a significant step in the most comprehensive programme of legislative reform in building safety in a generation. This bill will create the first national building safety regulator, which currently exists in shadow form in the Health and Safety Executive, and will overhaul the way buildings in scope of the new regime are designed, built and managed in occupation. Our reforms will empower residents to hold building owners and managers to account for ensuring their safety and ensure their voices are heard. Turning now to the Grenfell Tower Public Inquiry Phase 1 recommendations. As the Prime Minister made clear at the time of publication, the government has accepted the inquiry's Phase 1 report recommendations in principle. Our manifesto committed us to implement and, where appropriate, legislate for them. This commitment remains as firm as ever. Building on the firm foundation provided by the Fire Safety Bill, we consulted on proposals to implement the inquiry's recommendations as part of the fire safety consultation. The objective of the proposals is twofold: to ensure that fire and rescue services have the right information about a high-rise residential building to provide an effective operational response, and to provide a further step change to ensure the safety of residents in their homes. It is critical that we get this right. To do this, we must listen to the views of those who have experience of and concerns surrounding these issues, including those who have been personally affected by the Grenfell Tower tragedy. Only then can we deliver lasting, significant change. In many cases, our proposals go further than the inquiry's recommendations. In others, our proposals prioritise resident safety in such a way that it is practical and effective, as well as proportionate to the risks the inquiry has identified. Taken together, the Fire Safety Bill, the Building Safety Bill, and the Fire Safety Consultation will significantly improve building and fire safety standards. Moving to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government Remediation Programme. While progressing these much-needed reforms, we are focusing on what can be done now to ensure the safety of buildings. In this year's budget, the Chancellor announced that the government is providing a further £1 billion to fund the removal and replacement of unsafe non-ACM cladding systems for both the social and private residential sectors on buildings of 18 metres and above, or 6 stories and above. Those who registered for the £1 billion fund are now able to submit their funding applications. Alongside the risk it posed, ACM cladding placed an enormous psychological and emotional burden on residents of high-rise buildings, each wondering whether their home would be next. It is right that we are acting now to remove this danger, and I'm pleased to say that despite a national pandemic that's now hit us in 2 waves, there have been more starts on site for ACM cladding than at any point since Grenfell. And so I want to thank all the mayors of our cities and local authorities, all of whom have been working with me as Fire Minister to ensure that the pace of remediation increases so that we can ensure that every resident in those high rises feels safe. Turning finally to the Building Risk Review and Protection Uplift being led by colleagues in the NFCC. The government has provided 30 million additional funding to fire and rescue services and the NFCC. Of this, 20 million is specifically earmarked to strengthen protection capacity and capability. Of this, 10 million has been allocated specifically to strengthen the National Fire Chiefs Council protection activity and to the Building Risk Review Programme, which will ensure that all high-rise residential buildings in England are inspected or reviewed by December 2021. 10 million has been made available via a protection uplift fund so that fire and rescue services can increase their focus on other high-risk categories of buildings, such as care homes, hospitals, student accommodation, and blocks of flats below 18 metres. And a further 10 million has been provided to build the NFCC's central capability and ensure that they can implement the lessons from the Grenfell tragedy in local services contained in the Phase 1 inquiry. It is so important that we remember that the fire and rescue services up and down the country are founded on tackling, of course, preventing fires from happening, prevention, and also response, but critically the central pillar of protection. And that is what we're focusing on, rebuilding that capability under the leadership of the National Fire Chiefs Council. In closing, the guiding purpose of all our work is to strengthen the whole regulatory system for building safety. There must be greater accountability and responsibility for fire and structural safety issues throughout the life cycle of buildings within the scope of a more stringent high-risk regime. Equally, I am clear on the need to improve fire safety across all buildings, not just high-rise residential blocks. That is at the heart of our reforms to the fire safety order and also lies behind our commitment to enhance the protection capability of both the NFCC and fire and rescue services. I want to thank everyone here today for taking the time to invest in the future of fire safety and the invaluable part all of you have played and continue to play to ensure people in whatever circumstances can feel safe in their homes or their place of work. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of today's sessions.